Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what we need to be doing for part 3. If you click over here in February 16th through 18th, you'll see, again, it always takes a little bit of time. We've got a little bit of lag here. So you'll see that we've got part 1, part 2, part 3. It's not present. It's grayed out here because it's not presently available, but it'll be available by the time you see this video. And if you click on part 3 in here, I just want to show you what's in here to make sure that you see all the components. There are 4 poems. The poems are called Persimmons, Dothead, Of the Threads That Connect the Stars, and What It's Like to Be a Black Girl. And then if you scroll down, there is a discussion board for each poem. Questions about persimmons, questions about Dothead, questions about Of the Threads That Connect the Stars, and questions about what it's like to be a black girl. So you are going to read all 4 of those poems and then respond to each of those discussion boards. Now, these discussion boards are a little bit different from the other ones that I have that you've done, because in these discussion boards, you are going to be asking questions. So if you have any questions about the poem, you're going to post them there and then potentially respond back. And I've got some very specific instructions about that I think are fairly clear. So once you get to reading the instructions, you'll know what to do. But again, I'm asking you first to post any questions that you might have about the poems. The reason that I'm doing that is that with these poems, I'm not going to go over them in as much detail as I might go over the other poems, as I've gone over the other poems. That's because you are going to be writing about these poems for your first major project. And so if I discuss them in any kind of detail, I start to give you some ideas about what to write about, and then I just end up getting back exactly what I told you, and that's not what I want on your writing projects. I want you to come up with some ideas. So here in these discussion boards, you're going to be asking questions that you might have. So if you're looking at something in the poem, you're not sure about it, post it to the discussion board, and hopefully you'll get a response back from somebody else, because that's what you'll need to do in this discussion board. Post questions and then post responses back. All right, so that's what this looks like in Blackboard. So again, just realize you have to read all 4 poems and respond to all 4 discussion boards. What I want to do now, though, is I am going to talk some about the poems, because there are a couple of things in here that I just want you to be aware of. I'm going to give you some general ideas about what's going on in the poems, and then you're going to look at some more specific questions that you might have. You're going to post those in the discussion board. So let's look at the first one. It's called, it might be hard to read there, my picture is covering up some of the text, but it's called Of the Threads That Connect the Stars. Now, in this assignment you're going to be working on, your first writing project, you're going to be talking about metaphorical language. And so just to be aware that this poem is called Of the Threads That Connect the Stars, realize that that is a metaphor itself, right there in the title of the poem. Threads that connect the stars. We know that that's a metaphor because you can't actually have threads that connect stars, right? Stars are going to be these balls of gas burning millions of miles away, and there's billions, actually, trillions, and you can't connect them with pieces of thread. We can't get to them, so there's no way we'd be able to do that. So obviously that can't be real. So these threads are not going to be actual threads like you have in your clothing. The stars are not going to be actual stars that you see in the sky. So what are they? What's actually going on here? And so that's one of the things you're going to be exploring. But I just want you to be aware of the fact that right there in the title, we've got a metaphor. And so throughout the poem, when he's going to be talking about stars, we want to think about what that metaphor is, how it is that he's going to be talking about that. So it says right there at the beginning, "Did you ever see stars?" Right? Asked my father with a cackle. He was not speaking of the heavens, but the white flash in his head that when a fist bursts between his eyes. So we have one kind of stars we might think about, those balls of gas burning billions and billions of miles away. But we're talking about something else. He's getting punched in the face and sees stars, right? You may have seen in a cartoon, sometimes we'll have that when somebody, gets knocked on the head, stars circle around their head or something like that, right? So they're seeing stars in that way. And so, what is it that's happening with that? It says in Brooklyn, this would cause men and boys to slap the table with glee. This might be the only heavenly light we'd ever see. And so, there's kind of this sense that they're kind of laughing about this idea of somebody getting punched in the face. They think that's kind of funny. And so keep that in mind, what we have going on here. I never saw stars. Well, maybe he never saw those stars, but he also starts talking about other kinds of stars. The sky in Brooklyn was a tide of smoke rolling over us from the factory across the avenue. The mattresses burning in the junkyard also causing smoke. And so he's not able to see the stars in the sky. He's playing around with the meaning of stars there. Sometimes it's about the stars in the sky. Sometimes it's about being knocked in the face. We've got these mattresses burning. A lot of students don't know. People don't know that back before we had better safety standards, mattresses were fairly flammable, and it was a kind of a thing that people might do for fun in certain kinds of places. People might set mattresses on fire because they'd go up really, it's like a big thing. You set a mattress on fire, and so that's something that might happen, particularly in not the best neighborhoods that people might engage in. So that's what's going on with the mattresses that are going to be burning. We've got riots. These are actual riots that happened in 1966 that we're going to be talking about, and then we're talking about his son seeing stars through a telescope. So again, I'll leave it to you to read the poem in greater detail and then ask some questions. But those are just some things that I wanted to point out to you because I know that it might be issues that we might have, things that we might not be completely sure about. The next poem I want to talk some about. Let's look at this one. It's called Dothead. Dothead is a racial slur. It is definitely not a polite way of referring to somebody who's going to be Hindu. What happens, you have people who are going to be Hindu and they might be wearing a bindi on the women might be wearing a bindi on their forehead, might be wearing a dot on their forehead, and so Dothead is going to be a slur to refer to people like that. So it's definitely not a polite or appropriate way to refer to somebody. And so it's interesting that the poet, who is Indian himself, is going to call his poem Dothead. And he starts off saying, well, yes, I said my mother wears a dot, right? So his mother is going to be wearing one. So again, wearing a dot. So he himself is going to be Hindu. And it says, I know they said third eye in class, but it's not an eye, not like that. It's not some freak third eye that opens on your forehead like some Chernobyl baby. And so he's talking about this dot that his mother is going to wear. And I want you to be thinking about, again, the kind of metaphorical language that we have here, right? Metaphors and similes. Look at it, says it's not some freak third eye that opens on your forehead like on some Chernobyl baby. So that's going to be a simile, right? Because we're going to be using like. And I have a note down here about what Chernobyl is, a Chernobyl nuclear disaster. And there's this idea that, nuclear radiation can cause birth defects. And so sometimes we have this sense that uh, um, if that causes that kind of birth defects, people might have a third eye. If you've ever seen the opening of The Simpsons, there's a fish that has three eyes, and it's because it's living next to the nuclear power plant. And so there's this idea that nuclear radiation potentially causes three eyes. So we've got a simile there, and what does that simile potentially mean? And so go through and look at the various metaphorical language that we might have here. And then also we just want to look at what it says here. It says, I said this, and then it says, all right, what I said wasn't so half measured. In fact, I didn't say a thing. And it's a kind of a strange thing because he says, here's what I said, all up here at the top there, all this stuff at the beginning. He says, this is what I said. But then he says down here, in fact, I didn't say anything, right? Almost like that's what I should have said, but I did something else, right? And what did he do? And it's an action that he's going to take as he goes through. So just be clear that that's what's happening here. He's kind of saying, what I said wasn't so half measured, it wasn't so polite which is really what's going on up at the top here, that it seems polite. What he does down here at the bottom is not necessarily so polite. And so what specifically is that? Why does he take those actions? How does that help us understand something about how he's thinking about the situation that he's going to be in? A lot of the metaphorical language that we're going to see in this poem is going to be down here at the bottom, right? He's going to be talking about that third eye burned those schoolboys in their seats, their flesh little puddles underneath, pale pools where Nataraja cooled his feet. We're like, wait a minute. What's going on here? You might be very confused about this. And the reason that you might be very confused is that this is metaphorical language that we're going to be having here, right? Their flesh doesn't literally turn into puddles, right? Who is this Nataraja? I've got a comment down there about who that is. And so, I'm sorry, it's 3 asterisks here. Sorry, because Nataraja is the Lord of Dancers. Sati should be 2. Sorry, I got the wrong number of asterisks in here. Chernobyl should be 1. Sorry. So this will be correct on the version that you have. So we can see that Nataraja is going to be. Oh, look at what I've done here. Nataraja is going to be a god, and so it's like he's turned these schoolboys into pools where Nataraja is going to put his feet into. So what's going on in that situation? Again, it's potentially confusing, but there's some specific questions that you might be able to ask in the discussion board and see what somebody else is going to potentially come up with. If we look over at this other poem, What It's Like to Be a Black Girl, for those of you who aren't, just a couple things we might want to keep in mind with this. I mean, just realize that we say things like feeling like you're not finished. You can't a human being can't literally be not finished, right? So on some level, that's going to be a metaphor. And think about anything that's potentially confusing. It's smelling blood in your breakfast. Can you actually smell blood? Do you usually do that? Maybe you literally could, but in what ways might that be a metaphor? And so be thinking about some of that. Be thinking about some of the things that she's going to be talking about, how she's going to be describing her hair, the kinks of her hair. Think about things like primping in front of the mirror that denies your reflection. Who or what can deny your reflection? Can a mirror actually deny your reflection? Can a mirror actually say, I'm not going to reflect you back? Maybe if you're a vampire, but not if you're a real person. That's not really going to happen. And so that is actually a special kind of a metaphor, which is what's called personification. We've turned the mirror into a person. And so think about what that begins to suggest to us. So we have that for that poem. And then the most difficult, the longest poem that we have here is called Persimmons. One of the things I want to draw your attention to here is just realize that if you've got a title that's going to be something that's really basic, right? Persimmons. Persimmons is a fruit. It's like calling a poem apples, right? Or oranges, right? It's strange if, here's my poem called Apples, right? Well, yeah, those are apples, but they're apples. What do I care about that? They're not that important. Well, usually when we're going to be doing that, if we're going to call a poem something that's going to be very ordinary like that, we're not necessarily supposed to take it literally. These persimmons might represent something else. They might be metaphorical in some ways. That is, we might literally be talking about them, but on some level, they might also represent something else. So what is it that the persimmons represent in this poem? Why are they so important to the person? And just a couple things just to keep in mind that are going on in here. It starts off, it says, in 6th grade, Mrs. Walker slapped the back of my head and made me stand in the corner for not knowing the difference between persimmon and precision. And the reason that this is happening is the person who's going to be writing this poem, the person in this poem, is going to be a recent immigrant to the United States, doesn't speak English very well when they're in elementary school, and so can't hear the difference between those two words. If you're a native English speaker, it's very easy to tell the difference between persimmon and precision. If you don't speak English very well, they might sound very similar, and so he's going to get slapped in the back of the head for that. And so just keep that in mind. And then he's going to talk about how we eat persimmons and think about what he might be saying about that metaphorically, what those persimmons seem to potentially represent here. One of the things that then gets confusing is we move to this third stanza, this third section in here, and we say, Donna undresses, her stomach is white in the yard, dewy and shivering with crickets. We're like, wait a minute, we were in sixth grade, and now what's going on? He's with this woman, and they're naked. You're like, wait, how did we get there? And the poem jumps back and